Wow, what an event, what a venue. This is not an event, this is a spectacle. Thank you so much, Michelle, Graham, Holly, Rachel, for not putting on another boring energy conference. Thank you so much. This is amazing. This is my third Disruptors Conference, and it looks like it's definitely going to be better than ever. And I'm delighted to be a keynote speaker to set the stage and get things going here. Well, we have some things to talk about over the course of the next 3 days. We have a journey to net zero by 2050. So let's talk about that. I chose a photo out of my collection from an airplane. You know, honestly, I don't know how he took this photo because it doesn't look very safe. Sort of flying at an oblique angle to the runway. I think we could agree that where we want to get to in our journey to 2050 is that green future on the horizon, and that it be a soft landing. That's where we want to get to. And I'm not here to tell you what that green future exactly looks like. There's going to be lots of discussion about that over the course of the next 3 days, but I am here to sort of tell you what to think about as you listen to the speakers, as you think about what the conditions that are necessary. In other words, like, what bags do we pack for this journey as we get to net zero by 2050? Well, we've got a lot of work to do. If we think about the current situation in the world, we are still pumping gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere. It's been 7 years since the Paris Agreement was signed, and I think we can agree there's not much of a dent been made into the problem. 2050, it's only 28 years away. 7 years since the Paris Agreement, 28 divided by 7, 4, quarter. That's the span of time. I mean, we've got to be thinking about it. It's not very far away. So one of the questions is, can it be done? Or the corollary question that I'm interested in, what's it going to take to get it done? What's it going to take to get it done? I want to talk about that. So 28 years ago is a great benchmark, the 1990s. What were we doing and what were we experiencing in the 1990s to give us a sense of what we were then, where we are now, and what can be done? So there we are. 1995. So what was going on in 1995 and what's changed? Well, arguably not much has changed. For those of you that were around in 1995, it was the Pokemon craze got started. It's a photograph that I just bought, actually, for my collection. It's an original journalistic photograph, Vienna, 1992. So actually, some things don't change either in terms of the actors that are out there. We can sort of maybe conjecture about the scapegoats and how that's all changed over time. But well, let's talk about what has changed, where we were at. Windows 95 in 1995. We have CDs for upgrades. If you remember, it used to take several hours to do an upgrade, and it wasn't over the internet either. Well, speaking of the internet, remember that sound? I think that was music to our ears. 1995, 28.8 modems. Think about then and think about where we are now. You know, I have a tendency to collect a lot of old things from my personal collection in Energyphile. You can check out some of them on energyphile.org, but I actually rummaged through some old magazines that I used to read back then and kept. Byte magazine, there's Mark Anderson talking about how he's going to upgrade his Netscape browser. Does anybody remember what he's doing with his hands? Remember that game with the string? I mean, I kind of vaguely remember that, but anyway, I guess we've moved on and changed. We've got George Lucas, Wired magazine, talking about the next Star Wars trilogy. That was the Star Wars 1, 2, and 3, the prequel. You probably can't read it up there. Just below the W, it says the great HDTV scandal. It means that we didn't actually believe in some technologies back then. 1995, we were still using paper maps. You had to have one in the glove box to get around. We had satellite, full constellation by 1995. It was only 1995 that the 27 satellites were put up, and that allowed us to get into the GPS revolution. The GM EV1. I had the pleasure of actually test driving one of those back in the mid-1990s. The GM EV1 didn't make it, as you know, but it did set the stage for what was to come. And now, 28 years later, we are at an inflection point where electric cars are not a reality in terms of full transition where everyone drives one, but we're certainly well on our way to the substitution and transition. What is that word, transition? You know, we hear a lot about it. I've shown you glimpses of the past and where we were, and I think you would agree when you see pictures of modems and CD software upgrades and the state of entertainment, that massively scalable change is possible in society over the course of 28 years, which should give us optimism about getting to 2050 and net zero. But we have to understand the conditions precedent that allowed us to make those changes, such that not only do I know where I am within a few centimeters, but I actually know where you are through a phone. Isn't that amazing, actually, in only 28 years, going from paper maps to that state? So that sort of gives us optimism. But then there's a little bit of a question in my mind, in fact, it's a question on my mind 24/7. Is it really justifiable to compare software, entertainment, and telecommunications to the energy circumstance? Here we see wind turbines looming and lurking behind oil wells, attempting to take away the market share and displace them. But is it really that easy? And then there's more difficult transitions that we have to think about as we listen in on the sessions today. Things like aviation. That has to change. The good news is we have all sorts of clever people working on things like a hydrogen future and hydrogen filling stations and buses and so on, and some of them are indeed even a partial reality today. But is it true that what we envision today is going to be the reality 28 years from now? And I keep coming back to the notion, what are the conditions that are necessary to bring about a full transition, such as we did, say, from paper maps to GPS? Well, there's me in 1995. I've transitioned, got gray hair, glasses. Back then, I was a bit of a nerd. Never thought I'd be on stage talking to couple thousand people. Actually, I always wanted to transition into a bit of a game show host. So here I am. Let's play, shall we?
Welcome to Spot the Transition.
Welcome, Graham, Michelle, Holly, and Rachel. You are the contestants today to play Spot the Transition. So each of you are going to be given a choice of 5 objects. You will have to choose 2 that represent the transition from and the transition to. So shall we play? Michelle, how about you being first up? All right, give her a big hand. You chose computer and typewriter. Well done. It was a no-brainer transition. Fantastic. Okay, let's talk about that one. Transition was relatively simple. The keyboard was the same. The people didn't have to change the way they actually did things. The computer, although it was initially more expensive than a typewriter, went down in cost over time, and the productivity per word went up. So this was a clear no-brainer and full substitution. Well done, Michelle. 10 points. All right, who's next? Graham. Graham, you're up. Let's get you to lock in your answers. Choose the 2 out of the 5 that best represent the transition. There we go. There you go. iPod to streaming. Well done, Graham. Graham, unfortunately, I'm only able to give you 5 points on that one. This is what we would call an incremental transition. It's only worth 5 points because actually if you look at the sequence of changes over time, especially over the 30-ish years, we actually went from turntable to streaming, and you only identified the incremental transition, so that's only worth 5 points. I'd say, Graham, if you're thinking about 2050 in this conference, you may want to think about, well, when you had your Walkman or your Discman, were you really thinking about streaming and wireless earbuds in your ears as you were running? Maybe not. There are things that no doubt we are going to be thinking and seeing in 2050 that we have no idea about, and further to that, maybe we shouldn't be so prescriptive. Just a comment. Okay, Holly. Spot the transition. Please make your choices here. Got oven, GPS, landline, microwave, and a film camera. Well done. Oven and microwave. So let's take a look at those two. Just a minute. The judges? No. Okay. No, Holly, I'm sorry. That's only what we call a partial transition, okay, because many people still have an oven in their home and they also have a microwave. So it's not a full transition because the feature set of the microwave is not necessarily a full substitute for the oven. Again, something we need to think about as we think about where we're headed, because I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people with an electric car in the garage and a combustion engine. So are we really going to make a full transition? Just saying. All right, last contestant, we have Rachel. Locked in your answers, cell phone, computer, paper map, film camera. Okay, here we go. Cell phone, payphone, fantastic. Clear substitution. How many of you saw a payphone in the last 5 years? I don't know, you'd struggle to find one. They're around in the London area, but we'll talk about that in a minute. 10 points, clear, full substitution. Shall we get her to play double or nothing? Absolutely. Come on, let's give her some encouragement. Woo! Okay, when we play double or nothing, Rachel, we ask you to tell us what the transition is that is hidden. Well done, you identified it. The transition is the phone booth itself. And it has been converted into a ticket sales box, tourist info, and cash, and even a defibrillator. So, well done. That's 20 points for you. You are the clear winner. And this example shows clearly that infrastructure has to transition as well, or can. All right, let's put the games aside. What I want you to walk out after my presentation with is a sense of just looking around. Many of you are analytical. I just want you to close your spreadsheets. It says, a picture is worth 1,000 spreadsheets. Just walk around, take a look, and always be asking yourself, well, what are the conditions in what I see to make a full transition, or is this an interim transition? And what is it going to take to get us to where we want to get to in a relatively short period of time? I can show you many examples, but this is for you to do in your own time. There are 3 things to think about that I'll coach you on. First thing for a successful transition of the new versus the old is equal or better utility. I mean, honestly, why would I buy something if it's not as good as what I already have? Or at least shows the promise of what I'm already going to have. And that decision is made around a kitchen table or a boardroom table, where executives may be considering putting in completely new hardware, appliances, and things into their factories, and have to make that decision, or building completely new factories. Will the new ones produce as much or equal or better utility? Will the appliance that the consumer buys that is zero emissions equal or better utility? Now, we know that one of the features that we're looking for, overwhelmingly from a climate perspective, is reduction of emissions. but is that a sufficient condition in a human sense, in terms of a consumer sense of executing a transition? And this is the importance of one of the things I want to get across to you, is that decisions are made at a very human level, and that we have to consider the human element of decision making in terms of the feature set that what we are transitioning from, so the transitioning to the thing we are being asked to transition to has better or equal utility. It helps if it's cheaper. You get that magical moment when you have something new that has equal or better utility and it's cheaper. At that point, you do get rapid adoption. When you attend the many presentations of new and interesting technologies, products, services, ask yourself, is the person on stage showcasing something that gives us equal or better utility from a consumer's perspective, and is it ultimately going to be cheaper? Now, it doesn't have to be cheaper immediately. I think we demonstrated that with our Spot the Transition game. A computer was far more expensive than a typewriter. But over time, the cost per word and the overall feature set justified the computer, and the cost of the computer went down. It's a classic example, horse and buggy to Ford Model T, which is used. Is that really a fair comparison to what we are to expect going forward? I mean, the Model T Ford had clear features that were superior to a horse in terms of its speed, its range, the ability to sustain that speed over long periods, and the power to pull was far greater. And by the way, the cost of buying a Model T, which was about $500 back then, and operating it was cheaper than buying horses and running a stable. So, cheaper, better utility, that's a no-brainer, full substitution. All suppliers have to make money in a free market sense. Again, not necessarily up front, but all suppliers have to make money, otherwise the whole thing folds. If a gas station doesn't make money, that link in the supply chain is vital. Break one link in the chain and the whole thing falls apart. Ask yourself, when you think about transitions, if everybody along the supply chain is going to make money, and is going to make money in the absence in the 2030s, maybe it's 2040s, when subsidies are gone. Because if it doesn't make money, I can show you plenty of examples of failed transitions because they didn't satisfy this or the other features that we're talking about. It's a pivotal moment around 2010-11 with this car. It's really an amazing feat because it was 100 years of trying to commercialize electric vehicles, 100+ years. And finally, the features started to match that of a sports car. The cost was way too high. The producer wasn't making money with the Tesla Roadster, but Mr. Musk and his team, I think, pulled off an incredible feat and then translated the knowledge they gained from this into the Model S, the Model 3, and we know the story then. It was not the case with the GM EV1 or the Voltaire, another electric car that tried in the 1970s. So better, cheaper, and it has to make money. Let's try and relate that to some of the things that we see. My stylized picture of a solar farm, which, by the way, you can see in large format in the gallery at the back. Check it out. I like to amplify the photos I take now because they sort of bring to the fore sort of the features and allow me to think a little bit more about the transitions. But this thing is really remarkable in terms of that one dimension of cost, making it cheaper. In the 1990s, solar panels cost about $300 a watt. Today, they're 50 cents. So we've got one of the key ingredients. The utility features are almost there. If it's paired with storage, then we can get the same overall features and utility as we can with other sources of power. And the producers make money. So that's why solar panels are taking off, as are wind turbines. But is that the case for all other types of technologies? Well, it's dynamically changing, and we're going to watch it and read our magazines along the way. But I would say to you, I think one of the things that we can take away from the 1990s today is don't have a rigid mindset about what 2050 is going to look like, because there's going to be a lot of incremental transitions along the way, much as there was from a turntable to listening to music through streaming. Okay. The innovation that we're seeing out there is really quite incredible. It's accelerating in pace. But one of the things you have to think about, and I talked about this the last Disruptors when I was on the stage with my Energyphile project, I talked about the fact that the incumbents, the entrenched actors, they innovate too. This is a business after all, and they like to defend their turf. This is a unique situation in that we actually want the incumbents, whether it's the oil and gas industry, the big industrial heavy emitting plants, we want them to innovate. The scientific imperative is we have to reduce emissions ASAP. And if we get fixated too much on trying to philosophize about what 2050 is going to bring and argue about it, and not realize that there will be a whole bunch of incremental pathways to where we get to, we may not actually diminish a single ton, much as we haven't really, in my opinion, since the Paris Agreement was signed. It's imperative that the incumbents innovate on the dimension of reducing emissions. And in this regard, we are seeing some very exciting things, and you're going to hear more about them as the day and the conference goes on. Well, the examples that I showed you seems so easy and smooth, doesn't it, in retrospect? But we know that things are not necessarily stable. It's a wild world out there, whether it's natural disasters, economic disasters, geopolitics, all sorts of factors out there, capital markets. They affect the pace at which things change. And such is so true in the world of entrenched energy systems, where it requires trillions of dollars to change. It didn't require trillions of dollars to go from a turntable to earbuds and streaming. It didn't take $1 trillion to do many of the things that we compare, it seems, today's energy transition with the technological transitions over the course of the last 30 years. It actually unnerves me when people compare energy transitions to software, entertainment, and telecommunications, because the conditions are so different and the scale and the magnitude of the challenge is so much greater. We're going to hear more about geopolitics and other factors through the course of the 3 days. This reality is actually nothing new in the history of energy. I think we got accustomed to a quiet period between 2010 and 2020. But the reality is it's an ugly world out there. And things like wars do affect the features of how people want their energy. People want their energy cheap, clean, safe, and secure, especially secure, energy security. And when energy security is challenged, we're not going forward. We actually go backwards. We regress. World War I and II, where we had petroleum vehicles, in the absence of fuel, we went backwards and reconfigured our machinery and our apparatus to run off of coal or coal gas, such as these gas bag cars. If we think about today, in Europe in particular, but actually in many other parts of the world where we're not necessarily focused on with the headlines and the news, there's a big push back to burning wood and coal because natural gas is too expensive. It's the easiest way for a consumer to achieve the features and the utility they're used to at a cheaper cost. And so we have to double down to make sure that there are other alternatives that offer the same features and utility at the same cost, and that everybody makes money along the way. And when we go backwards one step, it's harder to go forward too. But we are going forward, and that's the good news. We are going forward. But can we go forward fast enough? Can we go forward in a way that offers us that soft landing on a course-corrected way to get us to net zero by 2050? It's a photo I took in Northern Europe about 3.5, 4 years ago. And I always come back to my photos, for those of you who know me, I just kind of stare at them and say, well, what is this telling me? And how would different people interpret this type of photo? Well, actually, I like in these days now to amplify the message, if you will. So I'll turn that into a little pop art for you. Green turbines. So I find, or show this to people, there's a bit of selection bias. In that term, you sort of see what you want to see. So if I show it to people in the clean energy, renewable energy camp, immediately the turbines stick out and say, see, we're making progress. We're transitioning. I said, yes, we are. But on the other hand, if this is shown to an industrial company executive, they'll focus in on the industrial and say, see, we still need fossil fuels. It's not a full substitution. Wind energy, solar energy, they're intermittent. They can't give me the energy security that I need to be able to produce the goods that I produce to the consumers who want a certain set of features at a certain cost. So, yeah, I can do it, but who's paying for it? And so we kind of get into this debate and say, well, you got to get rid of those emissions ASAP. I say, fine, well, who's going to pay for it? Can I do it incrementally through carbon capture, where somebody more hawkish may say, no, you can't. This is where we're going to in 2050. I can tell you what 2050 is going to look like. Really? So I don't have the answers. I'm just interpreting the photos for you in different ways and getting you to do the same by playing spot the transition on your own and asking yourself, what do you see? Do you have a selection bias? If you do, and somebody sitting next to you has a different selection bias, are we going to get anywhere at all? Well, we will. The question is, how fast? That's the question, really, the big question. What are the conditions precedent to get us to that soft landing, that green horizon in the future, as optimally as possible, respecting the three principles, and respecting all decision makers, whether they're sitting at a boardroom table or a kitchen table? That's the key. Well, we want to get to this state. You know, there are some that say we can get to that state and we got to repurpose the buildings like we repurpose telephone booths. Again, there are many opinions. Meanwhile, no question, the technology moves on at a rapid pace. Will anybody buy the technologies? Is it possible? What are the conditions precedent and how fast? Whether it's renewables all the way to fusion energy. Well, I'll give you my opinion. And I've said this, it's not a new opinion. I may have even said it 2 or 3 years ago at the Disruptors Conference. But there's way too much emphasis on science and technology. I mean, all the examples I show you were tech examples, right? And you go, oh, yeah, I remember that. Oh, yeah. Well, these are all technology examples. And we're sort of conditioned into that, aren't we? Like, how many times have you heard this phrase, follow the science? Follow the science. It was not about energy also, it was about the pandemic and so on. Okay, I'm a scientist. I've got 2 science degrees, actually. I mean, math, statistics, physics. I get the science. But actually, in the last 10 years of my career, I'm following a different science. I'm following behavioral science. Because at the end of the day, science by itself and technology is pretty hollow. Right? We're people. We're people. We make the decisions. And our energy future is about us. And that's what we have to focus on. We need to start talking amongst ourselves. And I know that's sort of a hackneyed thing now, isn't it? But we don't seem to kind of get it. And that's why I just so respect what Graham, Michelle, Holly, Rachel have done here. They've created a conference that allows us to interact, to talk to each other and meet people. And I challenge every one of you here as you stand up and go into the break, reach out to someone that maybe you don't know at the bar, the slide, basketball hoop. Play basketball with someone who has a differing opinion. Engage them in a conversation about the transitions and what it's going to take. Because if we're not all aligned, I don't know how we're going to sort of align ourselves on that runway. In fact, I don't even know how the pilot did it when I took this photo. But we got to open our minds. I think the great thing about this conference, if you actually look at the agenda, is like 40–50% of the 40–50% of the agenda is actually socially based issues. There's anthropologists, It's awesome. This is, again, about behavioral science is what we need to align. And I'm really confident that if we can align that, we can make those, whether it's multi-dollar decisions at the kitchen table or multi-billion-dollar decisions at the boardroom table to get us aligned. Well, we are ready to take off. I'm ready to take off at this conference. I mean, I'm really jazzed up. I think that there's just such a great agenda, not only of finance, geopolitics, human behavior, technology. It's just a great mix of things. I'm really jazzed up about trying new things. I like adventure. I want to try one of these things. The electric versions are coming out. So we're ready to take off. But that's nothing new. It's a magazine in my collection from 1940 or so. So a lot of things that you will see technologically actually are nothing new at all. You just have to have the right conditions for it to take off. And that's what we have to focus on as we listen to the presenters of the conference. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the game. I hope that you'll play the game yourself. Point it out to your family, your friends. Hey, there's a transition, satellite dish to cable. What were the conditions that took us there? It's really exciting times ahead. I'm excited because I think the conditions are ready in many respects to get us to that 2050, but the rest is up to us. And I'm very excited that even something old can take off. And there we go. The technology makes anything possible these days. Thank you very much. Enjoy the conference. Check out the gallery. I really appreciate it. And check out the website, Energyphile.